Bet the Board.
What do you mean you don't bet? I mean, I don't bet. You know, I don't gamble. I don't. I never have, and I never will. Yeah, right. I'll bet you $20 I can get you gambling before the end of the day.
You owe me 15 grand, pal.
Pay him. Pay that man his money.
It's the Bet the Board podcast.
God likes me. He really, really likes me.
In the end, I wound up right back where I started. I could still pick winners, and I could still make money for all kinds of people back home. And why mess up a good thing?
Here's Payne Insider and Todd Furman.
Welcome into the Bet the Board podcast, NFL Week 11, and a slightly different format for all of you, our loyal listeners, as we head closer to the Thanksgiving holiday. I am your host, Todd Furman, joined, as always, by my esteemed colleague and co-host, the one, the only Payne Insider. And Payne, we can't offer up spoiler alerts on this show because we know our listeners are firmly entrenched during football season, but did you watch the Yellowstone season premiere this past Sunday?
Well, first off, we're at the top of the show, so tell people why this will be a little bit different than usual Thursday shows.
I like to bury the lead. We're going to cover Monday Night Football on tonight's show. We will have an abbreviated holiday schedule next week. So for those folks that are normally inclined to tune in on Monday mornings for the good, the bad, and the ugly, and a Monday Night Football breakdown this week, which would be the 49ers-Cardinals game taking place in Mexico City, that'll be here tonight. I know a lot of you will tweet at us telling us the Monday podcast hasn't loaded in your feed. You've been warned ahead of time that that's the case, and we'll figure out exactly what the NFL/college football compilation podcast will look like next week. So that's even a better reminder to encourage you guys to sign up for the Bet the Board newsletter, and most importantly, follow the Bet the Board feed at Bet the Board Pod on Twitter.
Beautiful. In terms of Yellowstone, getting a little weird for me, and it was slow out of the chute, but it'll pick itself up.
You know me.
And it looks like Beth is going to have some competition.
You know me.
This season.
I am a storyline builder. I like slow. I like methodical. I don't need everything to get completely off the rails every single episode. After going through Ozark in its entirety, it felt like something ridiculous happened in every episode, and it set a dangerous precedent. But I thought it was a good start to the season. Obviously, don't want to spoil it for our listeners that haven't had a chance to watch. But if you haven't already done so, we don't endorse a lot of shows around here. Probably one of my favorites that are going on right now.
It's the only show I have time to watch.
Well, that's a step in the right...
In football season.
Step in the right direction.
I mean, Sunday, I can't watch it live either. Have to DVR it, and then, this past show was like 2 hours, so, you get half of it in with dinner on Monday night before the game, and the other half in with dinner on Tuesday night, and that's it. That's kind of how it works.
I turned it into a 4-part, 30-minute installment, much like a sitcom. So to your point, yes, don't have 2.5 hours to allocate to it on Sunday night by any stretch, and I will anxiously look forward to the Payne recommended viewing list that you'll provide me with as soon as they hand out the Lombardi Trophy in Glendale in February for some of my off-season work. But all right, enough TV talk.
There we go.
We got a little football to cover, and it starts off with a sneaky, intriguing game on Thursday Night Football with the Green Bay Packers welcoming in the Tennessee Titans. And we've seen this number move from where it opened. Right now, you're looking at Green Bay, a full field goal favorite. There are some 3.5s in the market. Total pretty much painted 41. Total hasn't moved a ton, but you did see Green Bay take money on the initial open. We talked about the look ahead. It was well under a field goal. Green Bay with an improbable comeback against the Cowboys. The Titans look like the Titans always do in dispatching the Denver Broncos, and that's where we are. As far as tonight's game, a little bit of weather in the forecast up there at Lambeau Field, 24 degrees. We could see some wind. And when you're talking...
Little nipply.
Yeah, a little bit chilly. A little bit chilly this time of year. Not quite Snowmageddon that we're going to get, or might get in Buffalo. But when you look at cold weather quarterbacks, Ryan Tannehill, a much more limited sample size than what you're going to see with Aaron Rodgers. Tannehill 1-3 with a passer rating under 80 in 4 games. He's started below freezing temperatures. Meanwhile, Aaron Rodgers, no stranger to the cold. 23-8, a passer rating north of 105 in 31 games that he's played when the mercury dips. When you look at the coaching matchup, Payne, coaching familiarity between Coach LaFleur and the Green Bay sidelines and Mike Vrabel, I kind of wanted to start there. We talk all the time about X's and O's and what takes place on the field. When you have coaches that know each other, is there a way that you go about trying to dissect the game, figuring out who has the edge in that particular matchup?
Yeah, it's always tough. You try to actually get information to see how these guys practiced against one another, honestly. And to me, when I look at this particular game, I would think the advantage is Matt LaFleur's, knowing the Titans' offensive personnel quite well, having coached it in Tennessee back in 2018, and what LaFleur has now at his disposal offensively is a little bit different with what he had then. And to me, right, like offensively, you kind of know what the opponent's putting on film. So even though there is that familiarity factor, like Vrabel's able to watch film for the last 3 years and see what LaFleur's doing. So I think it slightly favors Matt LaFleur in this spot just because he knows what Ryan Tannehill can and can't do because he designed those game plans knowing those limitations. In general, right, these are just, I think you hit it perfectly, right? It's really two fade teams coming off wins where they both trailed by double digits. So you have a tough time assessing who you like here because they're sell teams, and most of the early week movement is very much situational. It's injuries. It's the short week where the home teams tend to perform better, especially when they played the prior week at home. And you mentioned the freezing temps at Lambeau for a team in Tennessee from the South, and specific to Ryan Tannehill's struggles there, he wasn't dealing with a high ankle sprain in those cold temps in past iterations. So I think this is a little bit interesting from that perspective. The injury situation for Tennessee started to leak over to the offensive side a little bit, and it's a real massive one. I mean, their all-world center Ben Jones is out, and we already know that Taylor Lewan, their left tackle, is out. And so with those two down, the only lineman this season that'll play tonight for Tennessee that have graded out above average is Nate Davis. And I go back and watch those games multiple times, and I compare them to what the numbers say, and give the Broncos credit last week for limiting Derrick Henry. But a lot of that is because the Titans' O-line isn't really good, and it's banged up right now. And you look at what Henry did last week, and yes, the Broncos' defense is really, really good, but they're better through the air than they are defending the run, even bringing in Jones from San Francisco this offseason. It was really, an average run defense who was down, 3 starting defensive ends. So, I mean, just if you look at Derrick Henry, ended up rushing for a negative 1.5 yards below expectation per attempt. The Titans had a 27% rushing success rate and negative 0.52 EPA per rush last week. You just wonder if those things get fixed on a quick 3-day turnaround. And I think that's exactly where Tennessee has to win tonight, right? You have to be able to run it. That's where the Packers are most vulnerable. 30th in defensive rush efficiency, 28th in EPA per rush allowed. And even in the miracle win last week, which you referenced, Dallas was successful in 49% of their runs. They churned out the 3rd highest rushing EPA of the week. Tennessee has to be able to run because Tannehill still doesn't look 100%. And I'm really intrigued to see how he reacts after a 3-day turnaround in these freezing temps. And then defensively for the Titans, just kind of quickly hitting there. Bud Dupree and Amani Hooker are out again. Jeffrey Simmons is a game-time decision, but if you follow that timeline of practice this week, didn't practice Monday, tried getting in a limited on Tuesday, and then suddenly didn't practice on Wednesday. So that kind of, I wouldn't say tips its hand because he's a tough dude, but you typically try to get a limited in there to see how the body reacts the following day. And if you're not back that following day, it's kind of a signal. Here's the problem for me, Todd. The Titans are very much a fraudulent 6-3 team.
Don't tell that to Titans backers, Payne. They've covered 7 straight football games. It means they're undervalued by the betting market.
It's very possible because they are that bad. The injuries and spot suck. But kind of what you're hinting at, my number doesn't get to 3.5, and you have a running dog here with the Titans. And I don't know if Green Bay just fixed their offensive problems overnight, right? They were still down 14 at home to the Cowboys heading into the 4th quarter. And the positive there was Christian Watson showed up. And the Packers have been dying for that space creator and downfield threat, but he's a rookie. And so we've seen what rookie wide receivers do. They're very inconsistent. And so, yes, 3 touchdowns, providing that deep threat is awesome. You also had a 33% drop rate. And so that doesn't really depict consistency. And that's what Green Bay is going to need because the Titans are the largest pass funnel defense in the NFL. They really are very good stopping the run. So Rodgers in this pass game are going to have to be efficient again. Candidly, I've moved on from this game. It's just not for me, right? It's just not.
And I mean, when you look at Green Bay last week, the key to their success was establishing the ground game. I mean, they run nearly 60 plays offensively. 2/3 of those are handoffs. to A.J. Dillon or Aaron Jones. They gave it to their horse. I'm not sure that's a easily rinse and repeat blueprint, given the things that you outlined for the Tennessee defense. And for everybody that wants to laud Christian Watson, I always think it's fascinating because people talk about a player in the wake of his 3-touchdown, 100-plus yard receiving day. You know who's not fooled by that necessarily is odds makers who have set his over-under receiving yards in the mid to high 30s, depending on where you shop. So it's either you're going to pull wool over their eyes again for the second straight game, or Green Bay is going to have to go in a very different direction because the Titans are not going to allow Watson to beat them over the top in a defensive scheme, to your point, that's a pass funnel, but that has been vulnerable over the top to big plays. You just can't hit them all that often with some of their playmakers banged up. So no doubt, plenty of intrigue here. I think when you look at the Titans, clearly the Colts winning last weekend against the Raiders changes the dynamic a little bit in this division, and a Tennessee loss coupled with a potential Colts win this weekend, you never know exactly how things will play out in the AFC South. Meanwhile, Green Bay, because they play in the NFC, seems like you win one game, you jump 17 teams, and you're right back in the thick of things trying to fight for a wild card position. So we'll see where this number ultimately goes and closes. You have seen 3.5s kind of ping pong around some sharper shops. The 3.5s didn't last. We'll see what that looks like when we get towards kickoff. As far as Sunday is concerned, familiar foes renew acquaintances. This time at Gillette Stadium between the Jets and Patriots. The difference a game makes, Payne. The Jets would move into first place in the AFC East with a win. They'd go to last place in the AFC East with a loss and a Bills win. The Jets have not been in first place this late into the season since 2010, back in Week 12. Roll out the red carpet. Robert Saleh is taking receipts. When you look at these two teams, I'm not going to say they're built in mirror images of one another, but they do have top defenses. The Jets, one of the tops as far as PFF grades them out. New England, one of the best in the league right now in EPA. When you look at the Jets, they do have to overcome a little bit of history if they're going to get the outright win on Sunday. 13-game win streak for New England. Mac Jones 3-0 versus Zach Wilson. Last loss came back in 2015. The Patriots are seeking their 7th straight season sweep, tied for the longest active win streak in any NFL head-to-head matchup. And when you look at Jets quarterbacks during this span, 11 passing touchdowns, 23 interceptions. Wilson and Darnold have a 2 touchdown passes combined, 13 interceptions. The Jets would love to pull off yet another outright upset. Payne, we saw this game just a few weeks ago. We gave out the Patriots on this podcast as one of our best bets, right around to pick 'em. Number ends up closing in that 2.5 soft 3 range. When you look at this number, I think that may be the most compelling discussion to have, given the respect the market is showing to the Jets coming off of the bye a week after upsetting the Bills as a double-digit dog.
Yeah, I agree. Price is really important here, and New England ended up closing a 3-point favorite 3 weeks ago in this matchup, and it was obviously in New York, and both teams are coming off the bye. So that means one data point, the Jets upsetting Buffalo at home, has caused quite this adjustment because everyone seems to forget that the Patriots exceeded expectation against the Colts. And the other thing to think about here is the Patriots not only closed a 3-point favorite on the road in Week 8, but they led by double digits with under 2 minutes to go in a game where they were without their starting center, David Andrews. They were without their starting defensive tackle, Christian Barmore. They were without their starting safety, Kyle Duggar. So those guys all look poised to return here. And now there was some early money on the Jets that we're grabbing 4, 3.5. It's why we're kind of down to like 3.2 right now. And I'm aware of who was responsible for that. And it'll be interesting to see if we start to see a little Patriots money now at 3. And it started to kind of trickle in a little bit here. But for me, when I look at this, it comes down to something we talked about leading up to the Bills game. The only way the Jets cover the short number is if Zach Wilson is permanently fixed, because we saw him play within structure against Buffalo. That is something we outlined well in advance before a lot of people, and we know that Zach Wilson likes to improvise, and he was holding on to the ball for 3.3 seconds on average before throwing it in the NFL this season, right? Like before that Buffalo game, it was dead last. And so the splits were wild. I mean, he was quarterback 40 out of 40 in yards per pass attempt, success rate, EPA per dropback when he held on to the ball for more than 3 seconds. When he got rid of it in less than 3 seconds, he was an above average quarterback. So that tidbit 72 hours before the Buffalo game must have gotten into the right hands, because someone in the Jets front office must have dialed down or something, because magically Zach Wilson became a different human against Buffalo. He released the ball in 2.3 seconds. It was the third fastest of any quarterback in Week 9. And he didn't commit a single turnover-worthy play. He finished with a 101 passer rating, and his adjusted accuracy was 80% when he was kept clean, which happened quite frequently because he released the ball quickly. So if that's the new Zach Wilson, and we see some further improvements made post-bye, awesome, right? I mean, there's just really no reason for him to play sandlot football when your defense is knocking on the door of being, top 5 in schedule adjusted efficiency, right? Like, you don't want to throw these games away because you're turning it over and taking sacks and, losing the field advantage battle there. So what's interesting here, though, is obviously you outlined some of those struggles that Zach Wilson's had against Belichick, and, it's pretty ugly. And that's... Yeah, I understand the Jets have 2 weeks to prepare, but Belichick does as well. So I'm sure he's going to account for some of those changes from Zach Wilson, but it'll certainly go a long way. But you look at the career marks here. I mean, Zach Wilson's completing 53% of his passes against New England, 7 interceptions, pressured on 45% of his dropbacks with 7 sacks. So to me, this comes down to, will Zach Wilson play within the scheme for a second straight game? It's really the only chance the Jets have of covering this number. And it's easier, I think, for younger people to make some change when they see results, right? Like, Zach Wilson makes that massive adjustment and it leads to beating Buffalo. And my understanding is also that Elijah Moore is out of the doghouse. There was a little kumbaya meeting during the bye week. Fresh new start. Everything is past us, and we're starting fresh. So Elijah Moore is going to be starting in the slot this week, and that's over, at least last year was Zach Wilson's favorite target. So let's see how that shakes out. But for me, this game comes down to what Zach Wilson you will get, and if he returns to his old form, the Patriots are probably going to win this by multiple scores. If Zach Wilson enhances his Buffalo performance, then the Jets have a chance to win this outright. And ultimately, that's the largest factor in this game.
Are you surprised the Jets haven't leaned into Zach Wilson's mobility more? And maybe with 2 weeks to prepare, I'm not saying a tiger can change its stripes, but you look at the way mobile quarterbacks have performed against the Patriots, who have a little bit of a slower linebacking core. And I'm not going to put Zach Wilson as a runner in the same class as Lamar Jackson or Justin Fields. I'm not that naive. But do you think his legs can be a component that New England didn't have to account for the first time around, and maybe put this defense into a little bit more conflict than they've grown accustomed to against the Jets in the past?
Yeah, I mean, I think anytime you have a bye week, you're going to work on some things. You're going to implement some things that the opponent doesn't know, especially when it's a familiar foe within the division. What's the correct answer here? I don't know, right? I mean, we talk about this ad nauseum. The best running play you can have is a quarterback scramble, and a lot of it's improvisation. Some of it is designed runs. He's also 112 pounds, so you don't want to get the guy killed.
Just get down in space. I'm not telling him to drop your shoulder and overpower linebackers and DBs like Cam Newton over there.
I think the overarching answer for virtually every quarterback that has mobility is to be very calculated. But yes, scrambling is the most efficient run in football, so you should always enhance that. And
all I know is
there's a team.
I saw Matt Ryan run for 39 yards last weekend, so it makes me believe that every quarterback other than Tom Brady is capable of a scamper from time to time.
Yeah, I mean, there's a team in that state that's doing quite well running the football with its quarterback, right? Vanilla Vic is out there just taking the league by storm. And so maybe Zach Wilson channels his inner, Danny Dimes and starts running a little bit. And I do think when you start looking at totals at 37.5, 38, with some weather implications, right? Wind, you should absolutely enhance your quarterback run game.
Yeah, I'm interested to see. I mean, this game, based on the number alone, obviously has major implications within the AFC East and, of course, the AFC playoff picture as a whole. But it's the number that makes this so fascinating, knowing that there's a battle in the market. I'm curious to see where the price finally settles and, more importantly, how this game plays out on the football field. But when you talk about price, there may not be a single game more polarizing this weekend than between the Cowboys and Vikings. Before we get there, I want to encourage all of our loyal listeners to follow Payne on Twitter, @PayneInsider. I'm Todd Furman. You can follow me there. Most importantly, follow the podcast at Bet the Board Pod. And if you haven't already done so, still plenty of time. Go sign up and subscribe for the Bet the Board newsletter. It's in your box every single Friday throughout the course of football season. And as far as numbers are concerned, U.S. Bank Stadium will play host to the Vikings and Cowboys. You're looking at Dallas right now, a modest 1.5-point road favorite. Total in the game, 47.5. It's a rare matchup in the National Football League of two teams who both played bonus football last week with very different overtime results. The Cowboys come up on the short end of a 31-28 decision at Lambeau against the Green Bay Packers, their first such loss in franchise history, when they led by 14 points entering the fourth quarter, had been 195-0 previously in those instances. Meanwhile, the Vikings, they win 33-30 in Orchard Park, New York against the Bills, pulling off the third largest road comeback win of 17 points in franchise history. Prior to Week 10, the Vikings had lost 50 straight games, Payne, when they were down 10-plus points in the final minutes of regulation. You look at win expectancy, ain't nobody out there who gave the Vikings a chance once they turned the ball over inside the 10. But here we are, the Cowboys, road favorites in the game. I think we should probably start with the number before we get in some of the on-field matchups.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's the most intriguing part of this entire game because, man, this handicap is wild. And so we've obviously seen some initial money on Minnesota +2. That was the exact same number as the look-ahead line, and that may shock people, right? That odds makers reopen this the same despite two drastically different results in the win-loss column. Personally, I understand it. I think the easy thought is, how can this be Minnesota plus? They just upset Buffalo. Dallas just lost to Green Bay of all teams as a favorite. But I really think we talk about this all the time. Game flow matters. How games play out matter. And there's a drastic difference there to me. You go through these games play by play, quarter by quarter, data point by data point, and Dallas is leading by 14 heading into the fourth quarter at Green Bay. They're wildly exceeding expectations of a 3.5-point road favorite, despite Dak throwing a pick in the end zone and another one that led to a 24-yard touchdown drive for Green Bay. And you look at, even with those errant Dak throws, through three quarters, Dallas is a net positive 9% in success rate and a net positive 0.07 EPA per play against the Packers. For Minnesota, it's the complete inverse. They're down 17 the first 44 minutes against a Bills team who thought their quarterback might be out for an extended stretch and was missing three starters in the secondary. And Buffalo was still a net positive 13% in success rate and a net positive 0.17 EPA per play through three quarters against Minnesota. And so you actually look at how Minnesota scored their points last week. The opening drive required a 3rd and 11 conversion. Dalvin Cook plays superhero and hits that 81-yard explosive. Third touchdown drive for Minnesota required 2 4th-down conversions, including a 4th and 6. The Vikings are still losing at this point until Josh Allen can't handle a snap and Minnesota scores a defensive touchdown with seconds left in regulation. And then in overtime, Minnesota takes a 3-point lead because Justin Jefferson's miracle catch on 2nd and 22 against a backup corner. And listen, sometimes there's teams that just have the lucky horseshoe up their ass each season. Minnesota appears to be that team, and we're happy.
We're thrilled. I'm doing backflips, baby, about the Vikings and what they're doing so far. Backflips around here.
I mean, you're not going to find a betting show that loves Minnesota more than us the last 9 years. But the Vikings are number one in our luck metric. And the idea of Minnesota being undervalued to me is interesting. They're tied for the best record in the league. So by definition, if you don't value Minnesota that way in your power ratings, they're overvalued. And nobody doing this professionally has Minnesota power rated any better than 8th. And the guys I trust most have Minnesota still outside the top 10. And remember, this is a Vikings offense that had 29% success rate against Washington the week prior, the final 3 quarters of that game. So my only point to this is, if we weren't screaming to the heavens about the look-ahead line being wildly off with Minnesota +2. We shouldn't be talking about this game being wildly mispriced this week because of everything that we just divulged there. So, any more thoughts your way, Todd, specifically to the line and the price before we get to some of the matchups?
No, I think oftentimes people get caught looking at records. And while there's no doubt Minnesota has changed their culture, it's not just mere coincidence that they've performed exceptionally better in close games than what they were doing last year with a defensive-minded head coach in Mike Zimmer. I think you laying out the very different approaches that each team had, or performances, I should say, last weekend, and how we've arrived at a very similar number speaks volumes before you even get into some of the X's and O's. Now, one thing I will add to this as well, if the Dallas Cowboys remain favorites at kickoff, the Vikings would be the fourth team, Payne, since 1970 to be a regular season home underdog with an 8-1 record or better. That number comes per Kevin Seifert from ESPN. In 2 of those 4 instances, it involved backup quarterbacks. That's why the team with the better record were underdogs. So we're talking about historical consequences here and implications from a point spread perspective. So we're at the number here. We understand Dallas is a favorite. It's not like people are running over men, women, and children to move the Vikings into a short favorite role. Why is that number the case? Well, if you look at Dallas defensively matched up against the Minnesota offense, I think there's a lot of things the Vikings should be concerned about when you're talking about an offensive line that could be down one of its key cogs this week in Christian Darrisaw against a Cowboys defense that last week had to change their scheme a little bit because of a very big injury that didn't get enough buzz going into the game.
Yes, so the largest advantage Minnesota has, I think, in this entire game is on the ground. Dallas has had some trouble stopping the run since week 6. They're bottom third of the league over that stretch in both rushing success rate allowed and EPA per rush allowed. Now, 3 of those offenses Dallas faced were all top 9 in rushing efficiency, and all 4 were well above average. Chicago and Green Bay clearly found something, right? I mean, Dallas has given up over 200 rushing yards each of the past 2 games, and, Kirk Cousins doesn't provide the rushing element that Justin Fields does, but you're looking at a Dallas defense that's now 27th in the NFL in yards before first contact per rush attempt to running backs. Specific to how the Vikings run, and anytime we break down Vikings games, we mention this because it's a different style, right? A lot of it's from 11 personnel, 3 wide sets. The Cowboys are 21st in EPA per rush allowed, 22nd in yards per rush allowed, and 15th in rushing success rate allowed from 11 personnel runs. The Cowboys have also been horrific stopping the run in the red zone defensively. That is easily the Vikings' best advantage in this game on either side of the ball. But you hit a couple of those injuries that are worth mentioning, and they're both on this side of the matchup and have this clear correlation to them, in that the Cowboys are number 1 in pressure rate even after not getting home last week against Aaron Rodgers and the Packers. Part of that reason Dallas didn't get their usual pressure is Micah Parsons played more linebacker than along the defensive line because Anthony Barr was out. Anthony Barr returned to practice on Wednesday in a limited fashion. Let's keep an eye on that. I'm sure Barr would love to face his old team who didn't think he was worth re-signing. But if he's out there, then Dan Quinn can get back to unleashing Micah Parsons. And the correlation to that is Christian Darrisaw, right? The Vikings starting left tackle. He's in concussion protocol. Those have been averaging like 1.5 games. So it's a true coin flip there. But the impact is massive if Darrisaw can't go. He's graded out the number 1 tackle in the NFL through 10 weeks. He's been fantastic in pass protection. He's been a road grader in the run game. The other thing that's worth keeping an eye on is Justin Jefferson. He randomly popped up on the injury report with a toe injury. Todd, I don't think that's anything. I think he's going to be out there.
No, I would agree there. I mean, I think it's pretty minor. He was a limited participant there. What is interesting about reading in some of the Minnesota Vikings comments, a very different tenor in the wake of their comeback win against Buffalo versus Dallas and the sheer level of disappointment with some of their run fits. And Micah Parsons pretty much called out everybody. He said that if we don't play assignment football, this is going to continue to happen until we figure out how to be able to stop the run. And when you look at this Cowboys team, there's no doubt it's a pass rush that gets unleashed, but you can't be in 2nd and 4 and 3rd and 1 and expect Micah Parsons to be able to get home. I do think it is interesting when you look at the matchup between Justin Jefferson and Trevon Diggs, a high level of familiarity between these 2 players going all the way back to their time in college. Well, Jefferson was at LSU. Diggs was at Alabama. Diggs got the best of Jefferson last year in the matchup. Obviously a little bit different as far as Kevin O'Connell calling plays and how creative they've gotten getting Jefferson open. TJ Hawkinson clearly has been a revelation as well. It's given the Minnesota Vikings another weapon. High volume as a tight end, a nice little security blanket there. Now on the other side side of the ball, Payne, when you look at this Dallas Cowboys team, Dak wasn't at his best. Threw 2 costly interceptions last week against the Packers. It's what allowed them to keep the door open. When you look at the Cowboys offensively, do you see any tactical advantages they have or areas where Minnesota is going to get the best of Dallas when the Cowboys have the football?
So you mentioned Dak struggling a little bit, and certainly he wasn't great last week. But if you watch some of the film, it's CeeDee Lamb being a little bit inconsistent with his route running and kind of leaving Dak out there. Neither of those interceptions were Dak's fault. So that'll be the interesting component here. But I think the one thing you'll hear about this week is Dak's potential struggles against zone, where he's much better as a quarterback against man coverage. And it's true, but there's different types of zone. There's different styles of defense. And if you just parse it out and look at what Minnesota really does, they live in their too high shell. Their starting safety, Louis Cine, we know is out for the year. Their starting corner, Cam Dantzler, is on IR. Another depth piece is also in concussion protocol. This was already a weak Vikings secondary coming into the season. So there's been a lot of these protection mechanisms built in to allow that secondary to survive. And obviously, Patrick Peterson had a revitalization last week with 2 big interceptions, but that's not how he's playing this season, and that's not how his down-to-down grade appears, that he's this all-world corner still. But since the start of last season, Dak Prescott is actually the second-best quarterback in EPA per dropback against too high shell among 35 qualifying quarterbacks. And based on that same coverage, if CeeDee Lamb is able to, follow up the good part of the Green Bay performance with another good one here, I think it's going to show quite well. But against that too high shell zone concept, Lamb is being targeted on more than 32% of dropbacks. It's the 3rd highest mark in the league. He's just got to stop cutting off routes and being, this improvisational receiver who's leading Dak out to dry a little bit here. The other matchup advantage comes with Dalton Schultz. Looks substantially healthier post-bye, and the Vikings are bottom 10 in the league defending tight ends when you look at catch rate and yards per target. We jumped the gun a little bit of touch last week on Zeke returning. We knew he was a fast healer based on some of the injury history. We know he really is a guy that attacks the rehab stuff. It was supposed to be a 3 to 4 week injury. This Sunday will be a month, so Zeke's trending well there. The main aspect, though, of Minnesota being overrated in my mind comes with who they've played specifically on this side of the ball and who they've played at home. So, make no bones about it. Like, Minnesota has an elite home field advantage. We told you years ago it was number 1 in the NFL. The way that they've kind of built that stadium and the way sound gets pumped in there and reflects onto the field is something interesting if you want to Google that and find out the constructs of that dome. But to us, in the new age, Minnesota's home field advantage is worth about 2.8 points, and that's pretty much peak of the league. But they've played Green Bay, Detroit, New Orleans, Chicago, and Arizona at home. Those 5 teams we have as an average power-rated team of 21st. And then you look at the offenses that they've played at home. It's an average efficiency rank of 20th. So Minnesota's defense is stepping up in class here against this Dallas offense, and I think Dallas is going to have some success here on this side of the ball here.
Well, and I mean, you look at some of the numbers those aforementioned offenses have put up. You throw Green Bay out, it's the outlier back in week 1, but all of them had success. I know the Bears largely did their damage in comeback mode. Arizona stayed within 1 possession more or less from start to finish, put up a crooked number there in the high 20s, and you'd have to think the Cowboys poised for a little bit of a bounce back spot. Both teams looking forward potentially as well to games on Thanksgiving, a more traditional spot for the Dallas Cowboys, playing at home on a short week coming up. Minnesota, a little bit of uncharted territory. They'll have the night game as they'll welcome in the New England Patriots. But I did find it interesting when you do your reading and figure out exactly the buzz around these two teams and the level of emphasis they're placing on this game, given what we saw unfold last weekend. Curious to see where this number goes as we inch toward kickoff, kind of sitting in no man's land right now. From Sunday afternoon in the marquee game between the Vikings and Cowboys, into what we will see Sunday Night Football between the Kansas City Chiefs and the Chargers. For the second straight week, it is the Chargers playing in prime time. This time they're at SoFi Stadium, and they find themselves anywhere from a 5.5-point home underdog on the low end, upwards of 6, a total that sits at 51 right now. And if Wednesday was any indication, Payne, it's trying to read the tea leaves, putting on your fake doctor hat and figuring out which team will be healthiest in the receiving core. But before we get there, a couple of trends worth noting. When you look at how things have gone, fifth meeting between Patrick Mahomes and Justin Herbert, the Chiefs won the previous meeting back in week 2 after Jalen Watson go-ahead 99-yard pick 6 of Justin Herbert. You look at Mahomes, 3-1 straight up, just 1-3 against the spread in those 4 meetings. The under, surprisingly enough, 3-1 in the 4 matchups as well. The Chiefs, however, have had a ton of success playing at the Chargers. 8-0 straight up the last 8 trips out west, 7-1 against the number. The converse to that, Justin Herbert has covered every game during his NFL career as a dog of 5+ points. I lay out all of that to ask you kind of what I leaned into as far as overall receiver health. Are we buying what these teams are selling us, that the Chargers are going to have Michael Williams and Keenan Allen out there, while the Kansas City Chiefs may need to get a delivery truck driver to help round out their receiving core for Patrick Mahomes?
It's a really good spot to start this breakdown, and I think we just lean into the Chiefs side a little bit more here to start, and then we can transition to the Chargers. But specific to the Chiefs, right? Mecole Hardman missed last week, hasn't practiced yet. Juju, boy, that was a nasty concussion. I think he's more of a nay than yay at this point. MVS got dinged up in the Jacksonville game, hasn't practiced yet this week, has a little bit of an illness. My instincts say that MVS is the likeliest of the 3 to go, but if any or multiple of those receivers miss, things get a little bit tougher, because the one key element that we break down every time this matchup comes about, and it's this specific game within the game on the field, it's my guy Derwin James versus Travis Kelce. And we know Derwin hasn't always been healthy for this matchup, but the splits are ridiculous. We've referenced them, I believe, was it Monday night or a Thursday night game when we broke down the first one this season?
Yeah, Thursday night.
But Thursday night, yeah. And so when Derwin James is on the field against the Chiefs, Travis Kelce's only caught 57% of his targets. He averages 1.2 yards per target, and he hasn't caught a single touchdown. But when Derwin James is off the field, whether it's injury or a snap here or there against the Chiefs, Kelce's just gone wild, right? He catches 74% of his targets. His target share increases by 10%, and he averages 3.4 yards per route run. So there's this possibility where Patrick Mahomes is throwing to MVS and Kadarius Toney and Sky Moore and a clamped down Travis Kelce, and I think that potentially changes the entire dynamic of this game, and partly why we've seen this come crashing down from Chiefs 7 to 5.5, and that money came in on Tuesday. But it could lead to the Chiefs being a little bit more run reliant here. And I know you look at the Chiefs, and that's not really their MO, right? They're number 1 in pass rate over expectation. I think we've really been, caught off guard and stunned with how inefficiently the Chiefs' run game has been. But the best part of the Chiefs' offensive line is right up the middle. I mean, this is probably the best interior offensive line in the league. And you get a Chargers defense that's 29th in schedule adjusted rush efficiency. And a week ago, they let tackle Jerry Tillery go. And then Austin Johnson went on IR. And then against the 49ers on Sunday night, the Chargers lost 2 more defensive tackles in Christian Covington and a name who, I apologize, but I believe it's Agbanani. So there could be more balance from the Chiefs' offense here based upon who they're playing, the defense they're playing with the injuries on the interior, where their strength of the offensive line is, and based on some of these receiver injuries. But, I think when we look at this, the reason, and it's so tough because, all these reports come out and you get the negative of 3 receivers not practicing on Wednesday, and you get 2 receivers that are practicing for the Chargers on Wednesday. And so it's like, let's just pummel the market here and get to this game. But obviously, there's some other areas here for the Chargers. The game, to me, is more meaningful for them, right? I mean, you're 2 games back. You don't have the tiebreaker because you lost the initial meeting. And God forbid you lose this and go 3 games back and you don't have the tiebreaker. I mean, your only path at that point is through the wild card. So it feels a little bit more pressing for the Chargers here. But, obviously the optimism on the other side of the ball where Keenan Allen and Mike Williams return to practice on Wednesday has caused a little bit of this movement.
When you mention the hit on Juju Smith-Schuster, I don't ever wake up in the morning choosing violence, but if what Andre Cisco did not once but twice in the span of about 5 plays happened in an NHL game, that incites a bench-clearing brawl. Let's put it that way, because he went out there headhunting, in my opinion, once on Juju, was shocked that there wasn't a penalty called there, and then when it happens a couple of short plays later, somebody's going out there trying to take out his knees or exacting a measure of revenge, to say the least. So you hope Juju is healthy and back on the field. He's really been a revelation for what the Chiefs want to do operating underneath, and a guy that I know you targeted early from a fantasy perspective, thought he could be a high-volume receiver, and he hasn't disappointed in that regard. Thankfully for the Chiefs, they at least picked up Kadarius Toney, and I think what's interesting poking around on this game, Chiefs players in the locker room just floored by the fact that the Giants couldn't find a use for Kadarius Toney. He busts out with his first career touchdown in 90 yards from scrimmage last week.
Cisco's having a hell of a season, by the way. I thought both those hits were clean, but I'm old school.
Yeah, I mean, there's a little bit when you're talking about the lawn.
But I'm also about the hockey environment.
So
even if they are clean, you knock 2 guys out for one the entire game and one for a little bit of a stretch there. Yeah. Send the dogs out.
You got to do a little bit in that regard. You mentioned the Chargers getting a little bit healthier in the receiving core, at least on the outside looking in now. We'll reserve judgment and to figure out if these guys are actually available. One of the biggest weaknesses that was exploited last weekend for the 49ers was the Chargers along the offensive line. They weren't able to run the football at all. Austin Eckler extremely ineffective. Do you think the Chargers can provide a little bit of balance? Will they be able to establish the ground game against the Chiefs defense that when you look at their counting stats against the run, not bad. Then you dig in a little bit further and realize the Chiefs have faced the 3rd fewest rushing attempts of any defense in the league so far this season.
Yeah, most teams are playing catch-up.
That's what happens when you got Patrick Mahomes on the other sideline.
So, to your point that you're kind of hinting at, like, this movement was based upon the 5 receivers and the practice report on Wednesday trending in the opposite directions. Now, I'm interested to see if Mike Williams and Keenan Allen play, but if they do play, what's the impact? I mean, Mike Williams went through the pregame stretch and jog last week prior to the San Francisco game, and that's typically a 5 to 6 week injury. They indicated that he was a little bit ahead of schedule, but Sunday is going to be week 4. And I know he's a specimen, but we're out there practicing at the 3.5 week mark of what the most savvy people thought, again, was potentially a 6 week injury. So to me, if he's out there, does he just become like a straight line deep threat? Because that would be, I think, important to the offense. But is he going out there and hard cutting? I don't see that, right? Keenan Allen has the hamstring injury. We know that that's been something that's bothered him, and then he re-injured it multiple times. And so I think he's got a chance to return, but what's the production level? And certainly there's a high risk for re-injury. And I believe Deepak said something to the effect of, if he does play this week, and if he does not re-injure it, we're still looking at a production level that's 20 to 25% below his average mark. So I'm less optimistic about the returns of Mike Williams and Keenan Allen in a 100% fashion. Gerald Everett is also quite banged up. Left the 49ers game Sunday night, didn't return. So if that's the case, the Chargers phone booth offense appears again. And that's something that you really have to factor in here, because once Mike Williams went down, Justin Herbert has just become check down Chad. I mean, 35th out of 39 quarterbacks in air yards since Mike Williams went down. You're looking at Matt Ryan, Mac Jones, Baker Mayfield, and Jared Goff only throwing shorter since week 6. And you kind of hinted at the Chiefs' defense, and if you look over that same time frame, they're quietly starting to play better. This isn't the defense that made that Super Bowl run, because they ended up finishing above average in schedule adjusted efficiency that year. But we kind of saw this was the time of year last year where the Chiefs went from like the most horrific defense to getting into that like 17, 18, 19 range. But if you look since week 6, the Chiefs defense is actually 18th in EPA per play allowed, 10th in success rate allowed, and you look at this 4-game sample, it includes Josh Allen in the Bills offense, Kyle Shanahan's 49ers offense, Doug Peterson's offense. So all plus offenses and great offensive minds. Starting corner Trent McDuffie returned. Defensive end Mike Dana is returned from injury. McDuffie, boy, that looks like a hit. I mean, he looks like a starting number 1 premier corner. You also have Willie Gay and Frank Clark, who are back from suspension this week. The one key area here is, can Austin Eckler, to your point, have some success on the ground? The run offense is really bad. So I would say marginally, yes, because the Chiefs' run defense has not been great. But is it going to be this wild attack where they go for 200 yards in the ground? Probably not, with some of the offensive line injuries and some of the issues they've had in the ground game in terms of their efficiency all season long. Can you find success and be a little bit balanced there and find 3-4 yards a pop, 5-6 yards a pop occasionally? Sure. I think the one area where the Chargers could have an advantage is using Eckler out of the backfield in the pass game. I mean, the Chiefs have been beat up there, right? I mean, they're allowed the 3rd most receptions, the 2nd most yards to running back passes. So that would be the element where, on paper, the Chargers have a little bit of an advantage there offensively. But ultimately, this game is going to come down to not just if those 2 receivers play in Keenan Allen and Mike Williams, but how healthy are they and what level can they contribute to here.
Does that surprise you at all when you think about it from a defensive standpoint, as far as Kansas City struggling to slow down opposing running backs, knowing how much faster and more athletic they've gotten? To your point, I mean, you look at what this defense is with and without Willie Gay, obviously still limited sample sizes. It's not quite night and day, but it's very close in terms of the different dynamic that he adds for everything that they want to do on the defensive side. And you talk about the talented rookie that they draft out of Washington. There's no doubt that all of the members of the Chiefs community buzzing about his overall talent level, and they've hit a home run there. The jury's still very much out on the first-round pick that they used on George Karlaftis, who's logged a ton of snaps, but hasn't exactly looked like the most efficient or effective pass rusher coming off of the edge. Still very early in his career. You never throw the baby out with the bathwater, but it'll be interesting to see. You talked about Justin Herbert and how he's looked throughout the course of the season. He finally showcased some of that mobility in limited instances last week against the 49ers, which I think tells all of us that those ribs are getting a little bit better. There's no doubt that this left some bad taste in his mouth, given that the Chiefs were the team that injured his ribs back in week 2. So I'm curious to see what they do in terms of providing wrinkles for Herbert, taking advantage of some of that mobility.
Yeah. Listen, I mean, I think when you look at the Chiefs defense, it's not perfect by any stretch, but the goal this offseason was to get younger and faster and swarm the football. And sometimes, they're going fast in the wrong directions. And so, Willie Gay certainly provides that element of being able to run sideline to sideline. And because of some of the issues they've had on the interior stopping the run, you have to delegate more guys there. And so ultimately it leaves your linebackers a little bit exposed in some of the pass game concepts to running backs. So that would be a focal point you would hope for in this game with Willie Gay kind of back. And, he's been back a couple games, but getting his sea legs under him. Frank Clark does return this week. So you mentioned Karlaftis there. At this point, he's a rotational piece. Some of the veterans like Dunlap have been performing a little bit better, and you get Frank Clark back there. But as long as you can have, right, and Mike Dana returned as well, but as long as you can have this 4-5 man defensive end rotation and you can keep those guys fresh, I think that helps getting pass rush. But a lot of teams are not getting home against Justin Herbert. The way he's releasing the ball, and there was a conversation that happened during the game on Sunday night, but it's like he understands that his left tackle's out. He understands that his right tackle's out. He understands that he has a rookie right guard. So he's getting the ball out quicker, knowing that he's got to be the guy that helps the pass protection. So that's the other element of why the Chargers are throwing a little bit shorter in these games.
Well, check down Charlie for this Chargers offense. You'd love to see this group hum on all cylinders if all the building blocks in front of their franchise quarterback were healthy. Unfortunately, that's not the case in a league where we know attrition is a very real factor in terms of impacting overall game plans, teams' overall success rates, and we'll see if the Chargers are able to figure things out, to your point, knowing that the division race would completely slip away with a loss here, and they'd have to find a much more arduous path to get into the postseason via the wild card and an extremely competitive AFC from top to bottom. Normally, this is where the show would come to a screeching halt. Payne, I'd ask for your input on an actionable element with the best bet, but because of the format, to remind our listeners who may have zoned out at any point of the show, either 2 minutes in, 27 minutes, or what have you, we got a little bit of Monday Night Football to get to, and we're going south of the border, my friend. The NFL from Mexico City with the Arizona Cardinals taking on the San Francisco 49ers. And we're looking at the 49ers right now, more than a touchdown favorite, an 8-point chalk across the board. Total in this game, 43.5-44. Shop around as always. When you look at the Cardinals, they have dominated the 49ers in recent meetings, going 12-4 in the last 16 games between these divisional foes, including a sweep last year of the 49ers where Arizona won both of those matchups by 7+ points. The interesting wrinkle in those, you didn't have the same quarterback start for either team. Week 5, it was Kyler Murray knocking off Trey Lance. Week 9, it was Colt McCoy getting the best of Jimmy Garoppolo. And for all of the trials and tribulations that we have seen from Cliff Kingsbury and some of his shortcomings as an NFL head coach, the area where he's thrived is when his teams are catching points. 18-6-2 against the spread in his career as an underdog of 3+ points. It's the best by any head coach since the merger, a minimum of 20 games. The only coach that's even close to him with a 20+ game sample size would be Mike Vrabel. In comes the Arizona Cardinals, fresh off of an upset win against the Los Angeles Rams. The 49ers, as we outlined on Monday, won the game against the Chargers, didn't cover, but by all intents and purposes were much more dominant and should have won that game by double digits. Is there something that the Cardinals do that's been so difficult for the 49ers to figure out over the last couple of meetings?
Well, the very first thing I think that's worth looking at is why some of the movement on this game, right? We've seen the total come down from 45 to 43.5 through the largest key of 44, and some of those reasons are twofold. Kyler Murray's hamstring, and right now it looks more nay than yay, but there's still 4 days, and then Hollywood Brown is progressing quicker than anybody expected, but based on Cliff's comments, it sounds like more nay than yay there as well. And then when you look at the last 4 meetings, I think it's the other side of the ball, right? It's Vance Joseph, and I think he deserves a world of credit. He's done a good job bottling up Kyle Shanahan's offense. Now, if you dig into those a little bit, 2 of the 4 matchups were against Trey Lance making his first start in the NFL, and it's C.J. Beathard. Only 2 are against Jimmy G. But in those last 4 meetings, the 49ers have only averaged less than 17 points against the Cardinals' defense. Now, aside from Kyler's health, the other reason we've seen movement on the 49ers is because what we discussed a little bit Monday morning during our recap show, and it's that the 49ers are ready to make a push. They're trending in the right direction health-wise off the bye. They deserved a far better result than the 6-point win against the Chargers. Past the Chargers script, right? And while at the same time, the 49ers defense is kind of getting reacclimated to game speed off their bye, the final 3 quarters, Chargers had a negative 0.28 EPA per play, 3rd worst mark of the week. Just 32% of the Chargers plays were successful. So, that is why there's, I think, some interesting value here that was presented on the 49ers. Kyle Shanahan also mentioned the possibility of Eric Armstead returning to the 49ers defensive line this week. So we'll see how that goes. But you're basically buying low on a team trending in the right direction off a phony result. And again, that's the other reason why we've now gone from 7 to 8. The Cardinals offensive line, down multiple starters still, right? Zach Ertz is out for the year. The 49ers front is the last defense you want to face with that kind of problem along the offensive line. So if it's Kyler at less than 100% mobility with the hamstring injury, that's tough. If it's Colt McCoy, yes, I think he runs the offense a touch better, but it's quick, short passes. And we just talked last week, you can't beat the 49ers defense playing in a phone booth. And that's what you're going to get with Colt McCoy. This game also being played at elevation, I think, is favorable to Shanahan's physical ground and pound offense that eventually will wear down the Cardinals defense. And again, their defensive line just kind of overwhelming a bunch of backups, and that physicality factor probably favors the 49ers as well playing at elevation. The other thing that we've seen from the Cardinals defense is they play substantially worse on the road. So this matchup just has, all of these layers to it where, pro bettors don't make it a normal thing like wanting to lay touchdowns in primetime games, like in weird spots like this where one team's really shown some ability to have success against a particular team, and it stuns me, right? Like, of all the guys that we think about, right, Cliff Kingsbury and Vance Joseph are the guys that have given Kyle Shanahan some trouble, but here we are. The other thing that's really interesting here is this matchup also has the very largest dichotomy in early down efficiency. And we talk about this all the time, how early downs are more predictive than third downs and fourth downs. So that's really the thought process here in terms of the pro bettors who went out, laid it with San Francisco. Now that we're past the key of 7 and we're out to 8, this will now be incorporated in teaser legs for pro bettors as well. So there's a lot of mismatches here. You're buying one team that we believe is a little bit at the bottom of where they're going to be price-wise in the market, and they're trending the right way in terms of health. And just, it's not a very good matchup, this specific one, on paper when you look at some of the injuries.
Can I ask the idiot in the room monkey question for you here as far as the number is concerned? When you look at the price of 8, do we think that's a hybrid number, thinking that Colt McCoy is, say, a 70% probability of starting, or do we see a scenario where if Kyler is upgraded, he hits the screen, this number comes back to a touchdown? If he's officially ruled out, we're talking about 10 on game day when things go on Monday.
Yes, the latter.
Okay. I'm always fascinated by it.
If Kyler hits the screen, we're coming back down some.
I mean,
I don't know if we're getting to 6.5, but...
And I mean...
Yeah, I mean, it's impacting the screen, right? Like, it's just wild to see this market. And certainly we talk about sports betting becoming larger. And I like a lot of odds makers. I like a lot of these guys that work at sports books. We said this on Monday, right, when we were talking about this Rams-Saints game when it was at 3. And you could tell 3 days before it happens where these lines are going to go. Just because you just knew, said, hey, even though the entire world knows Cooper Kupp's out, once it gets announced out on the screen, it's going to move. And sure enough, it goes to 4.5. And we said, well, we know Matthew Stafford's playing. Once he gets upgraded on the screen, this game's going to move. And then 12 hours later, Matthew Stafford gets upgraded, and we went from 4.5 back down to 3. So, like, you don't even need a position on this game to make money, no. Right? Get out, lay the 3, come back, take the 4.5. I mean, it's just weird. And it feels like the amount of money that's being bet, the markets would be a little bit more sophisticated with stuff like this. And we're not clamoring for more sophistication in the market, right? Edges have shrunk over the years based upon math and modeling and a lot of sharper people entering the space. But we're still really behind when it comes to injury news and its impact on the screen, because you watched Cooper Kupp. There was not a prayer on earth he was playing this week. And so it shouldn't cause a move from 3 to 4.5 when the obvious unfolds in front of our eyes.
Well, in the NFL, you can kind of, it's just befuddling more than anything else, because everybody is watching and monitoring these games. If it happens in, say, college football, for example, and it's a group of 5 quarterback that gets out. I mean, we saw situations where the market starts to go long before things hit the screen, and it's always fascinating when you try and figure out what sports it's evident. But I mean, I follow a number of different markets, and you'd be blown away the same thing in the NHL, where you can follow patterns for starting goalies. The market projects the starter's going to be out there, and you have 40 or 50 data points that tell you, no, that's not going to be the case, and the market responds accordingly. To your point, you can earn off of those things just by getting your money in at the right time and then figuring out what to do with that position later, whether you want to keep, dump, or middle, as the case may be. You can follow Payne on Twitter at Payne Insider. I'm Todd Furman. You can follow me there. Most importantly, as always, follow the podcast at Bet the Board Pod. And Payne, it's come to that time in the show. We've broken down 5 games as extensively as we know how to do around here, figuring out where our magical mystery tour takes us for this week's top investment.
Well, you're supposed to text me with a thumbs up, which I have not received.
All right,
yet.
so I'll have to go through the exercise now. We can kill a little bit of time.
Is that... There's two options.
Yeah, no, we're going through it right now, and I'm trying to fish out my phone as I sit here and filibuster a little bit while we're on air, task about your day and all of that kind of thing, and figure out what we're doing with it. I have now sent the text message and signed off my stamp of approval for where I think we should go. Okay.
Beautiful. We are going with a game that we broke down, so it's time-stamped above. And, this probably isn't going to be the most popular, especially... there's clearly some forward-facing folks that view this a little bit differently. But we're going to go with rotation number 471, the Dallas Cowboys. And we'll call it 1. And so that'll be the price. Dallas -1 is our best bet. And again, we broke this down above. No reason to belabor that point. I think the conversation in terms of pricing in this market was the biggest factor of this game and how we view it a little bit differently than a lot of other folks. And so it wouldn't completely shock me to see this tick up a little bit more here. So that's where we're at.
Hey, there were a couple of options that we considered, kicked around there, and think that this is a number from a situational standpoint and everything else that's created a little bit of value on everything that has transpired over the last 4 or 5 days. To your point, Payne, we know there'll be some market resistance from some folks that are respected. Let's see where this number ultimately closes. Regardless, I think we have a winner here with the Dallas Cowboys. Anything else that you would like to share with our loyal listenership? It's going to have to do without hearing your dulcet tones for the better part of 4 or 5 days with no Monday show on the horizon.
Yeah, we are back next week. Typically what we do for Thanksgiving week is a joint podcast, a merging of college football and the NFL. We'll see how long it takes us to prep all of those games. Sometimes we get a wild hair up our ass and record Tuesday. Many times it takes until Wednesday. So we'll kind of get our travel schedules coordinated here, Todd, and we'll find out the best attack.
Does that mean?
I would say no later than Wednesday afternoon. That joint NFL and college football podcast.
Does that mean Brad has to cover the NFL with us if we bring him on for college? We have to take him out of his depths a little bit.
We'll see how that goes. We will see how that goes.
All right.
We'll cross that path when we get there. I think we've earned some good faith this week with a specific game in the Pacific time zone.
There is no doubt about it.
That was a tongue twister there.
I was going to say, stumbling over your words right around lunchtime.
A specific game in the Pacific time zone. There we go.
All right. For Payne, you can follow him on Twitter. I'm Todd Furman. Follow me there. Most importantly, as always, follow the podcast at Bet the Board Pod. Best of luck with all of your NFL Week 11 investments. Should they start as early as tonight between the Packers or Titans or lead you into Sunday and Monday wagering opportunities. Most importantly, come Sunday afternoon with the Dallas Cowboys ticket in hand. We'll see you at the window.
Thanks for listening to Bet the Board. You can catch Todd and Payne every Monday, Wednesday, and Thursday during football season, breaking down the biggest NFL and college football games. And to make sure you don't miss any free best bets, subscribe to Bet the Board on iTunes, Google Play, Spotify, or wherever you listen to podcasts.